Welcome to Focus on Albany. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Howie Hawkins, who's running for governor as a write-in. So, Howie, from my opinion, this whole season has been pretty abysmal. So, tell us about the corruption of the two major candidates.
Well, I think it starts with the new ballot access law that basically eliminated anybody but Democrats and Republicans running for the statewide offices of governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and comptroller. For governor, it's the first time since 1891 when they started issuing government ballots that only the Democrat and Republican will be on a ballot, except for 1946, which was right after World War II. So there were 8 different attempts to get on the ballot by independent nominated. None of them worked because they tripled the signature requirements from 15,042 days to 45,042 days.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most difficult ballot access petition in the country now. So right there, there's corruption because the major parties are eliminating their competition, who, like our campaign, wants to call them out for their corruption. I mean, start with Zeldin. He photocopied petition sheets worth 11,000 signatures
Right.
in order to try to get another ballot line for himself, an Independence Party line. And this is a guy who was voting against the certification of the presidential election, calling Biden's election a fraud. And then he turns around and commits this, this is like junior high school stuff. I mean, it's hypocritical and blatant fraud. And I know the DA in Albany is investigating him. I hope they bring him up on charges, and the whole Republican Party, because this was done in the Republican Party offices in Albany. And then on the Democratic side, we've got case after case after case of what looks like pay-to-play corruption, where contributors give hundreds of thousands of dollars to Hochul, and in turn, they get hundreds of millions, even billions in contracts and tax breaks. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I was in a debate with Andrew Cuomo in 2014 after he shut down his Moreland Commission to investigate public corruption. And I called him a hypocrite because he shut it down when it started looking at his administration. But Hochul's even more brazen than Cuomo. It's unbelievable. So we have this election with, corrupt people running for the Democratic and Republican parties. And those of us that want to offer an alternative can't even get on a ballot. So, yeah, it's been a pretty dismal year for, progressive politics, certainly in New York State.
And they don't get their voices heard on mainstream media also. Does the Libertarian Party have a candidate this year?
Yeah, it's Larry Sharpe again. He's also running a write-in campaign. He's a victim. The Libertarian Party is a victim of the same thing we are. I mean, and the Libertarians, it took them from 1972 until 2018 to finally get enough votes to get a ballot line. And then 2 years later, Cuomo gets this law passed, which makes it nearly impossible to get on the ballot. To stay on the ballot, they increase the number of votes you need from 50,000 every 4 years to 130,000 or 2% every 2 years. So that brings in the presidential race, which for progressives, given how right-wing the Republicans have become, makes it harder, for the Green Party. So we didn't get, it turned out we needed 173,000 votes. That would have been 2% in 2020. And it says 130,000 or 2%, but it's, the last governor's race, it would have been 150,000. So to get back on the ballot, we need 150,000 write-in votes. That's a tall order. I mean, we're doing our best and urge people to vote for us by write-in. Don't vote for the two crooks. Vote for at least some struggling, honest politicians that are trying to not just raise the issue of public corruption, but all the progressive wish list that is nowhere within sight of Zeldin or Hochul, from single-payer health care to the Green New Deal to more progressive taxes so we can fund universal child care and other things that the people really deserve.
So let's talk a little bit about the corruption both by Zeldin and Hochul. Give an overview of the 11,000 signatures and how that happened.
Well, apparently they did what they did was photocopy petition sheets that were turned in, but they were short of the 45,000 signatures. So they photocopied, I don't know, if they had 10 signatures a page, that would have been 1,100 photocopies. And then, these petitions, 45,000 signatures, it was a big, tall petition. So they just sprinkled those photocopies into their petition and submitted it. Obvious fraud. And they got caught. And so, what else can you say? The only thing is, Zeldin, he signed there, I don't know how many volumes, 20, 40 volumes. He had to sign the cover sheet.
Mm-hmm.
So he signed on to what was done, but the reporting from the Times Union is this was done in the Republican Party headquarters in Albany.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we still don't know who, specifically made the photocopies and, put them into the petition. Apparently that's what the DA in Albany is investigating.
Mm-hmm.
And, whoever did it, they did wrong and they ought to be held to account.
Do you think Zeldin knew this was happening?
I would be surprised if he didn't. I mean, ultimately he's responsible because it's his campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And, if they pulled a fast one underneath him, then that's his problem because he didn't get on his staff. But the guy, when he's been going around saying, Trump should be the president, Biden got in by fraud, which, Trump is in 46 different cases, including before Trump judges, Trump's allegations of fraud were rejected by the courts.
Mm-hmm.
But Zeldin's going around perpetuating this big lie. So it's not, I think it's hard to believe he didn't know his little big lie wasn't being done underneath him.
Wow.
By his minions.
And unfortunately, the incumbent governor, Kathy Hochul, been involved in some scandals herself. So can you explain to our listeners exactly what's going on there?
Well, basically, it's pay-to-play corruption. The donors pay, and then they get to play. They get state contracts, or they get tax breaks, or they get subsidies. So there was the second Buffalo billion after Cuomo's Buffalo billion, which led to some people going to prison, for various wrongdoings in that. This is almost $1 billion that goes as a subsidy to the billionaire Buffalo Bills owner. And it also happens to be that her husband owns casinos and stadium concessions that will benefit from this new stadium that's being subsidized. So that's one scandal. Another is another $1.2 billion for another billionaire, Stephen Roth, who has got his Penn District plan basically to destroy the whole neighborhood around Penn Station and really not improve Penn Station and the surrounding neighborhood. They're going to destroy 55 billions, 40 of which are landmark eligible. They're going to eliminate 1,296 businesses in the neighborhood and destroy 2,371 apartments. And in their place are going to be 10 high-rise office buildings. And this is in a city where they have excess office space. And because of gentrification and redevelopment and all these schemes, they're suffering from a decline in affordable housing and neighborhood businesses, and thus the quality of urban living in Manhattan. And the only reason you could think that she would approve this is tax breaks from the state's Empire State Development Corporation, is that she's paying back a donor. Stephen Roth gave her, I'm trying to remember, here it is, gave her the maximum $69,700 campaign contribution. That's the maximum that you can give. He's also a big donor to Donald Trump. He's contributed nearly $500 million to Republican efforts to take back to Congress. See, that's what they do. These rich guys, they give it to both the Democrats and Republicans. So then no matter who's in power, they owe these fat cats. So that's another scandal. And then there's contracts she's given out through the State Department of Health, which she controls. One was to Digital Gadgets, which is owned by a guy named Charlie Tebele. He gave nearly $300,000 to Hochul's campaign, and the contracts are worth $637 million. And this is to provide at-home COVID tests. And they started issuing these late in the game. It's not sure they were needed. And at the same time, California was doing the same thing, but because they did competitive bidding and Hochul didn't, California paid 45% less for these kits. So there's another, big contributor gets a fat contract, and she's paying back her donors. And then you have a case with a couple up here in Syracuse who are with medical answering services, and they've given over $100,000 to the Hochul campaign, over $30,000 to the Democratic Party. They gave $54,000 to Hochul when she was lieutenant governor. They gave $236,000 to Cuomo's campaigns, and he's the guy that appointed her lieutenant governor. And in return, they've got a 5-year contract worth over $5 billion, basically to provide transportation services for Medicaid recipients. So, the big donors are getting paid off. And, Cuomo and a lot of people around him, and we had, the former Speaker of the Assembly, Sheldon Silver, and the former leader of the Senate, that guy in Rensselaer, I'm forgetting his name right now.
Joe Bruno.
Yeah, Bruno, and a whole bunch of others. There are like a couple dozen of them in the state have, been convicted of this kind of public corruption. And, Cuomo's campaign manager, Joe Prococo, went to prison because he took a bribe for greasing the wheels to get the Competitive Power Ventures, frack gas power plant, through the permitting process, even though it still doesn't have all its permits and is operating, which is another scandal. So it's unbelievable. This is, people say Ukraine is corrupt and we shouldn't support the Ukrainians who are being attacked by Russia. I mean, we got to clean up corruption at home before we can start talking about other people's corruption.
And then Tish James came out this week and said that she was suing Donald Trump. And there's been talk that Tish James really doesn't do follow-up, and she's not really, Attorney General material. What's your feeling about the suit and where this will go ultimately?
She's got a whole staff working for her, and I think this is something I'm glad she pursued. I wish she would also ask to take over the criminal case that the new DA down there in Manhattan, Bragg, dropped, which is on the same charges of bank fraud, insurance fraud, tax fraud. And she could do that. Governor Hochul could hand that case to her. The investigative journalist, David K. Johnston, called for that earlier in the summer or earlier in the year when Bragg dropped the case. So I would say I'm glad she's doing what she's doing. She could be more aggressive and also try to get that criminal case. Because, Donald Trump's been doing this stuff. For example, he was the unnamed co-conspirator when Michael Cohen got convicted of those payoffs, for the porn star that Trump was messing around with years ago and didn't want it to come out before the 2016 election. Those were illegal campaign expenditures, and Cohen went to prison for it. Trump was named as a co-conspirator, but they couldn't indict him because he was president for some reason. So, when are they going to take that case back up? Trump has been doing this stuff for years. The money laundering of Russian money goes back to the 80s. That's, basically the source of his finances, because I mean, how can a guy lose money on a casino? This guy is not a businessman. He's a crook.
Mm.
And, I think, his comeuppance may finally be coming. I think the Attorney General's staff has got a real case and they're pursuing it. And I hope it comes to real consequences for Trump and his family and the Trump organization.
Do you think, like everything else, that he's gonna slip through the cracks and get away with it?
I think this time they may have him. There's so many cases swirling around him. There's the case, and we've heard the phone call. The Secretary of State of Atlanta, a conservative Republican, but he knew Trump was up to no good, so he recorded the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We have Trump asking, find me 11,000 more votes to flip Georgia for my, presidential election.
Mm-hmm.
That's election fraud. That's illegal as hell. So, the DA down there in Fulton County is getting all her ducks in a row. And I find it hard to believe Trump's going to get out of that. The bank fraud, insurance fraud, tax fraud case here in New York, they've got the paperwork. The only problem there is, will the jury be able to follow it? Because it can get complicated. But they've got Trump on that, and then there's the January 6th committee and all the stuff they've revealed, and all the things we still need to know. We still don't have full information as to, for example, who the hell erased the cell phone and text messages of the Secret Service. There's a lot going on in this corrupt government, and I just hope the law enforcement and criminal justice, the DAs and the attorneys general will follow up and bring the people who ought to be brought to account.
So there's one other gubernatorial candidate I want to talk about, and that's you. How are you doing?
Well, we're doing our best. We're putting out news releases that at least go out on social media to our people. The mainstream media, they have only really focused on the ballot access question. And actually, we still have a case pending before the Second Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals that if we win, we will get on the ballot at the last minute. We don't know when the decision will come down. We had a hearing the day after Labor Day. If we win that, we'll be on the ballot. And, that'll make it a lot easier to get 150,000 votes. Given who we're running against, I mean, if you don't like corruption, we're the ticket to vote for. And if you're progressive, we're the ticket to vote for. Because, all the things that progressives have been fighting for in New York, Hochul is not for. And so, use your vote as your voice and, pressure the people, particularly in the state legislature, for example, to take this New York Health Act, which is for a single payer, universal health care system. Democrats said, give us the Senate, which had blocked it in the past. The Assembly had been voting for it since 1992. Give us the control of the Senate and we'll get it passed. Well, since they got control of the Senate in the 2018 elections, this bill has not come out of committee in either house, either chamber.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats made a promise and they've broken it. So a vote for us is a vote to those, Democrats who could bring it forward. Hey, if you don't, get serious about this act, which has enormous popular support. In fact, it has majorities of the members of the Assembly and Senate as co-sponsors. But for some reason, they can't move it forward. And that's because the top of the Democratic Party doesn't want to alienate their big donors from the health insurance industry and the farm.
So you're a write-in, and as of right now, you're still a write-in candidate. How many votes do you have to get that would enable you to be on the ballot next time around?
It's 2%. 130,000 or 2% is what the law says now. We expect that to be about 150,000 votes based on the last gubernatorial election. The last one, it would have been about 150,000 votes. So it can be done. That guy in Buffalo, got elected on a write-in vote. Lisa Mc,
Yes, but he was the incumbent and they didn't want the challenger to win, right?
yeah, and the media covered his campaign, on a daily basis. He was part of the narrative, and he could make his case. We're not. We're a footnote occasionally to the whole campaign in the major media, and that's a big problem for us.
Mhm.
And not being on the ballot, that's their excuse. You're not on the ballot. The other one, they say you can't win. Well, in this state, the Republicans can't win statewide. So why cover them? Why even cover the election?
Wow.
The system is so rigged, do we know who's going to win? So,
Mhm.
you might as well just forget about the whole election, but we don't want to do
Mm. So would you say that Hochul is corrupt as Cuomo?
that. In terms of pay to play, favors for big donors, yeah. He's,
Really?
yeah, you look at all her donors, they were all Cuomo's donors. In fact, even more so, real estate, Wall Street, the people that want the tax breaks and the favors.
How come she's not getting as a bad the bad press like Cuomo got? Because she's more likable?
I think it's because the Republicans have become so extremely right wing, racist, authoritarian, anti democratic, and Lee Zeldin is a part of that. That the leadership in the media, the people, the producers in the broadcast outlets and the editors in the newspapers, they're like saying, yeah, she may be corrupt, but Zeldin represents, a right wing zealousy that we just don't want. So you know, it does get reported, the Times Union, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Syracuse Post Standard. You can read it there, but it's, and then the Republicans, are hammering on this too, even though they're throwing rocks in a glass house given Zeldin's petitioning problems. Uh, on the whole, she's not getting the same scrutiny that Cuomo was starting to get by 2014. Um, and that was, I think, yeah, partly, Cuomo's kind of brusque personality. She's, not so in your face.
Hmm.
That may have something to do with it too.
But the one issue we did not talk about that started this whole thing off was her choice of a lieutenant governor, right? Brian Benjamin wasn't exactly lieutenant governor material, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, he got caught in one of these scandals. It was, as I recall, a state contract and he was a state senator at the time, and he told a
Right.
big donor he would help him get a state contract or a grant or something,
Hmm.
and it was so explicitly pay to play. Apparently, there was communications that were found that showed it was quid pro quo, and most of this, big donations and then contracts or tax breaks, it's not documented. So it's coincidental. It's not that they sat down and did a quid pro quo. So
Hmm.
that, stuff that you can't document, it's legalized bribery. Technically, it's not illegal unless you can prove it was quid pro quo.
Hmm.
So it's legalized bribery.
Well.
And so, what we really need is a system of full public campaign financing,
Hmm.
like they have for state elections in Arizona, Connecticut, and Maine, where if you're on the ballot and then you qualify by getting a modest number of small contributions to document support, you get a campaign grant. All the candidates get the same amount of money to run their campaigns. We're about to institute a system of matching funds. It's partial public funding. And it actually increases the disparities between candidates who barely qualify and those who get a lot of those small donations, because it's multiplied in the case of a governor's race 6 to 1. In the state legislative races, the first $100 or first $50 of small donations is multiplied 12 to 1. But suppose you have $100,000 in matchable funds, and your opponent has $500,000 in matchable funds. So you get matched 6 to 1, and say in a governor's race. So you get a 600,000, but that 500,000 times 6 is 3 million. So they have 3 million 500,000. So the disparity of the 6 to 1 match is increased sevenfold. So it doesn't really level the playing field. But even worse, there's no limit on the amount of private money these publicly funded candidates can raise. So it's just adding public money to the old stinking system of private campaign financing dominated by the fat cats.
Wow. So
And this law to restrict ballot access was instituted at the same time by Cuomo and the Democratic chair, Jay Jacobs. They were saying the state can't afford to have minor parties get these matching funds. But that was a lie, because it's not the parties that get the money, it's candidates. They didn't change the down ballot petitioning requirements. So a Green candidate, I think they need 1,500 signatures to run for the assembly. And then if they raise the requisite number of small donations, they can get that matching funds.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all a ruse. The matching funds was just a cover for making ballot access nearly impossible for statewide offices.
So, Howie, our time is up. Anybody who wants to volunteer for your campaign or give you a contribution, how could they reach you?
Go to our website. It's Hawkins Matera. Matera is Mattera, all one word, hawkinsmatera.org, O-R-G.
Okay, and they'll have a space where they contact you if they want to volunteer or make a contribution, right?
They can do both at that website,
Okay, great.
hawkinsmatera.org.
Okay, Howie, so I'm sure we'll be talking again before the election. You've been listening to Howie Hawkins. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Focus on Albany. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube page, the channel. Thank you, Howie. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day.